Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have an awesome show for you. I'm Adam here with Worldwide Stereo, and today we're going to have a great show talking about amplification. And I certainly have an awesome friend of ours, very personal and dear to Worldwide Stereo, and a lot of people out there who know this guy. He is from Macintosh. As you can see, I've changed my lighting up a little bit today. So I tried to go with some Macintosh colors. I got the blue and I got the green kind of coming in over there. You know, trying to showcase that because they certainly are known for those blue meters and the green that light up the turntables and all the Macintosh logos that you see out there. So should be a fun and interesting show. But I want to answer a lot of your questions today, and that's what we have Ken here for too, because amplification is it's a tough thing. You know, a lot of people talk about it. A lot of people want to know what's right for my speakers. And there are a lot of things to consider when we're looking at amplifiers. And I really want to help you guys understand by the end of this kind of why amplification is not all created equal and what makes Macintosh amplifiers certainly so special. We're happy to have them. So without any further ado, I want to bring in a very good friend of mine from Macintosh. Let me get him here. Hang on one second. And there he is, the one and only Ken Zelin. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm in outside Seattle.
Yep.
And it's a little bit rainy here. Surprise, surprise. That's okay. It's okay. Cool.
It is. Well, we're in the midst of a heat wave out here, so it's. I think we're approaching 90 degrees today. So, but not in this room. It's a nice 68 degrees in my family room here. I like it a little cool. So, thank you so much for taking the time, Ken. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Great to see you. Glad you're doing well. And again, we're happy to have you. So, everybody, again, this is Ken Zelin from Macintosh. You all know me, Adam from Worldwide Stereo. But Ken, I want to first start out by, your story is definitely legendary. You've told it to me before how you got involved with Macintosh, and I'm sure we have lots of viewers out there it's a great story. So I'd love you to tell them how you got involved with Macintosh and what you've been doing all this time.
Sure. Well, I always loved phonographs. My brother, who's 9 years older than me, and I'm 62, had this little phonograph with big yellow 78 RPM records. And that was my first phonograph. And I always loved anything mechanical. And when I was in high school, a new hi-fi store opened up in town, Purdue Radio Company. And this is in New Jersey, West Caldwell, New Jersey.
Okay.
And I fibbed. I told my mother I was going to the library, and I rode my bike down to Purdue Radio.
Uh-huh.
And I walked in, and they sold all the really hot brands back then. They had Kenwood and Macintosh and Tandberg and Thorens and Bozak and Advent and all the good stuff. They didn't have Nakamichi yet because it didn't exist for another year. And I started hanging out at that store so much, they finally put me to work. So I wouldn't bug the salespeople anymore.
Sure.
So I would help out in the service department downstairs, and they taught me how to clean controls and switches and things like that. And that was my first exposure to Macintosh. And then I went off to college in Boston, and right outside Boston is a town called Newton. And second year of college, I decided I would visit the new hi-fi store in Newton, Massachusetts. And I went in there, and the woman who owned it was desperate for sales help. She had hired a salesperson who ended up having a little addiction problem. So she had to fire him. And so she persuaded me to help her out on weekends in the store.
Okay.
She didn't tell me that day that she was also dating the president of Macintosh.
Oh, right.
So she and I ran her store on Saturdays. She was closed on Sundays. And if the store was quiet, Gordon Gow, who was head of Macintosh, would say, let's fix an amplifier. And he'd bring an amp out, and we take it apart and fix it together. It was just a ridiculous opportunity that no one in the world will ever have again.
I know, right? That's insane. That's what I love about that story. It's just
crazy
how it lined up.
And then I found myself in Chicago, got into a relationship, brought me to Chicago, and worked for a Mac dealer there for a couple of years. And then Macintosh came to me and said, the owners of House of Music in San Francisco want to retire. And I bought a store for $50 down. It had been losing money for years. So the lawyer told me I was crazy to buy this store. But we turned it into the world's biggest Macintosh store. And I had that for 16 years until Macintosh persuaded me to work directly for the company. What they wanted was, I'm a pretty good explainer, and they wanted someone to run their training program.
Yeah.
And training is all about making complicated things sound simple. And I'm pretty good at that. So since then, I've been heading up the training department at Macintosh, which is, they don't have as many dealers as the big brands. It's not full time, which is why when I lived in Philadelphia, I was working with Worldwide Stereo for 2 years.
Yeah.
Assisting. And now I'm working with some local dealers in the Seattle area. But I'm not moving again. This is it.
Yeah.
I'm in Seattle. Of course, I said that about Boston and
you did
New Jersey and Philadelphia. So
I'm a little skeptical about that, man. Ken, may move again. We'll see.
Yeah, it could be.
But that's how I got introduced to Ken. I mean, when I started with Worldwide Stereo, and as most I'd say new hires for new companies, they send us up to Binghamton, New York to visit Macintosh to go through their McMaster's training program. So that's where I first met Ken, and it's been awesome ever since. He's definitely a good asset to have, and a phone number to keep when you got good questions or you just want to talk to somebody fun. He's great. So we really appreciate, again, the time. So moving on, I just want to actually get into some of these. We got lots of people that are commenting already. I mean, you got this Charlie started out here, and he was like, "Why was I so stupid and sold my MC40s?"
Those were worth a lot of money. I have always owned Mac, but I never bought stock in Apple. So everyone's made mistakes.
Yeah.
Apple, by the way, licenses their name from Macintosh, the stereo company, to put on their computers.
Yes, they do. And here you have Mark Miller said, loved House of Music in San Francisco. So he was an older customer, knew of you back then. Yeah.
How cool is that?
Let's see. This is an interesting. Are there any original Mac dudes or dudettes still there from back in the day making stuff? Love your stuff. I still have my wonderful MLD 7020 LD Laserdisc CD player. Works perfect. Wow. Yep. Okay.
Wow. Macintosh wanted to have a Laserdisc player, and of course they didn't know anything about video. So what they did was they went to Pioneer and bought top of the line Pioneer. And put a Mac faceplate on it and changed a couple of chips in it. And it was pretty darn successful for Macintosh.
Yeah.
There's one fellow, I've only been involved with Macintosh since 72, but there's a fellow at Macintosh who's been there for, I think, 51 years.
Oh my gosh.
He's head of the metal shop. So he's the oldest one, and then one of the people who winds the Transformers.
Yeah,
I think her mother used to wind Transformers.
So the combined experience there, right?
Yeah, it's just amazing. It's a 70-year-old company, and it's been in the same location since 49 or 50.
Wow,
so it's a long time. Macintosh is Binghamton. Yes.
So there might be some people out there that have joined in today that, they're watching, and I want to talk real basic right now about just an amplifier. What is it? Yep. What is an amplifier? Why do we need an amplifier? Why can't we just, play speakers, plug them into the CD player or something like that?
Yep. Well, you can do that. You just won't get too much out of it.
Right.
But it will work. You can actually, if you put your ear to the speaker, you'll hear a tiny bit.
Tiny, yeah.
So, there's two different things that we're always talking about. One is current and one is voltage. So voltage is electrical pressure. And think of a water pick, that thing where your dentist says you're not flossing well enough, you should buy a water pick. And you buy one of those things and you put your finger under the water and there's a lot of pressure. So that's like voltage. Now, if your house was on fire, you're not going to put the fire out with a water pick because it lacks quantity of flow. Quantity of flow is current is like the overall force, and voltage is pressure on one spot.
Yeah.
So speakers need volts and amps, or voltage and current. So a CD player will put out about 2 volts. The problem is that it can't produce any current. So when you plug a speaker in it, that voltage just collapses. It's kind of like trying to run an air conditioner off a D-cell battery. You know, it starts out with 1.5 volts, and you plug the air conditioning in, and the battery just dies immediately. It's just not going to work. So an amplifier takes the 2 volts from your CD player, your FM tuner, or your old Tandberg tape deck, or whatever you're using, and boosts the voltage up to a point where we can really power a speaker. 200 watt amp would be 80 volts on the transistor. And then it increases current. The last section of an amplifier increases current, which means that it's able to drive something that needs a lot of torque to pull it. And that's the job of an amplifier. So it's not very complicated. It's hard to get right. In fact, I have a little slideshow on how transistor amplifiers work. And maybe this is a good time for me to go into it. Is that okay?
That's okay. Let's do that.
Okay, so let's take a peek here. And let's see. Excuse me. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, is that showing up full screen?
1 second, and it will be now. There you go.
Okay, so cool. So this is what a transistor looks like. It's a round thing, typically with 3 wires. And one wire, the one on the left, is where the music goes in, and you can see a little sound wave. And the wire on the bottom is where the music comes out, and you can see the wave is bigger. That's good. It's amplifying. And a physicist is going to tell you this can't work unless you add power to it. Nothing can do work unless you add power. So that's the third wire. Power, music goes into, and music goes out. So that's a transistor. Now, you would think that that's the flow of electricity, right? It goes from little to big. But it actually isn't. And this is the key to understanding the imperfections of amplifiers. So a transistor is made of silicon. And if you went to Acme Silicon Company and said, I need some silicon to build transistors for an amp, and they said, what kind of silicon do you want? And you said, wave bigger silicon.
Wave bigger silicon.
Sound waves bigger. There's no such thing. It doesn't exist. So you can't take something that's small and make it bigger. You can take something that's small. Let's say that an elderly person can't read the newspaper. You can't make the newspaper print bigger. But what you can do is take the newspaper, put it in a copier enlarger, and make a new sheet of paper with the same news article that is bigger. And that's the key to how amplifiers work. They don't make a wave bigger. What they do is they look at a wave, use power to create a new wave that looks like the original wave. So the actual flow of electricity in a transistor is where I show power with that downward arrow on the right. It's going from the power lead out. And on an amplifier, that bottom lead where it's got the bigger music, that's connected to your speaker. It's just really this simple. But how much power does the transistor provide to the speaker to make it go up and down and vary like it's doing? That's determined by the original music on the left. So the music that comes into the transistor simply opens and closes a valve that allows power from the power wire to go to the output. And if the valve opens and closes with the music, the output will look just like the input. But remember, it isn't. It's actually coming from the power lead.
Yeah.
So let's say it's a 200-watt amplifier. Okay, so I've got 80 volts connected to the transistor on the power lead. Music's coming in on the left. Music's coming out on the bottom. Remember, the flow is actually vertical.
Yeah.
So the music's going up and down and telling the valve, the transistor, to open and close, and it's creating the music on the bottom. And let's say this is a times 10 amplification stage. Okay, Adam, you're pretty good at math. So if it amplifies 10 times and the input is 1 volt, how strong is the output going to be?
10 volts.
Excellent. And if it's 2 volts in, what's the output going to be?
20.
And if it's 3 volts, what's the output going to be?
30.
And if it's 9 volts, what's the output going to be?
90.
No.
No.
See, if I go fast enough, I catch everybody. So you can't get 90 out because you've only got 80. Oh, geez. Such a mean guy. Okay. So what happens is, if you try to get more volt out of the transistor than you're applying to it, it can't do that. Right? So the music wanted 90. The transistor's only been fed 80, and it chops the wave off at 80. And that is clipping. I don't know why this is never explained. This is why you want to buy power.
Yeah.
Is when the music gets loud, if the music gets louder than the amount of power you have, the amp chops the top and bottom of the wave off. And clipping is terrible because during clipping, you can have 40% distortion. And distortion is that fuzzy, buzzy sound, and it's kind of in the trebly, and it all goes to your tweeter and all of a sudden burns your tweeter out. Because a tweeters are only designed to accept 5% of your power. So on a 200-watt amp, there would be a 200-watt power handling speaker. The tweeter only has to handle 10 watts. But during clipping, 40% of your power goes to your tweeter. So an 80-watt amplifier is going to be sending 36 watts to the tweeter, which it can't handle. So clipping is a terrible thing, and everyone's trying to avoid clipping. Okay. Sure. Let's get out of that. Okay. So clipping is the thing we want to avoid in an amplifier. And good amplifiers have lots of power or headroom so that the music can get loud without the waves being chopped off. And that's one of the fundamental things about an amplifier. And that's something that sets transistor amps apart from tube amps. Is transistor, well, tube amps, let's start with tube amps.
Okay.
At low volume, they have fairly low distortion. And then as the volume goes up and up and up, the distortion climbs generally fairly gradually. And then when you hit the limits of a tube amplifier, it starts to distort more rapidly. But your ear hears that and you know to turn the volume down.
Right.
Transistor amplifiers are different. They, generally speaking, have super low distortion up to the point of clipping, and then it goes from super good to an absolute disaster very suddenly, and there's no way you're going to run over to the volume control. So it's hard to blow a speaker on a tube amp because you'll probably turn the volume down before it happens. But on a transistor amp, it's really easy. Yeah. So you want to have extra power in a transistor amp so you don't clip. I mean, tubes do they're known as clipping softly. So it's kind of like when you're on the highway and you're drifting a little out of your lane, and they've got the texture
crumble strip.
Yeah, thank you. That's it. The rumble strip, which tells you you're going off the lane. Think of a transistor amp as a narrow lane that's perfectly paved with no guardrail and a 400-foot cliff off the edge. As long as you stay in your lane, you're fine. And if you don't, you're in big trouble. There are companies that have something to prevent this. This is one of them. But that's a subject we'll probably get to later.
Certainly.
So that's one. Yeah. So we always want to buy enough power to not clip your amp. Should I get into a discussion of power? I know that was on our list here.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to bring up the neat thing with Macintosh amplifiers in general. You always see the meters on the front, and yes, they're there for show because they're gorgeous and they look awesome, but they're actually very, very useful. And I use it a lot on the showroom floor when I'm demoing things to really help people understand the relationship between a speaker and an amp. We have lots of the big powerful amplifiers on there. I'll just use the 600 watt monoblocks for an example. So you have an amplifier that can produce 600 watts of power and peaking at near 1200 watts, almost double that. And when you're listening to music, if you watch the meters, and I always show people like 1 watt of power, I'll turn the volume up on the preamp and get the meter to go to about 1 watt of power. And that relates to a speaker sensitivity rating, which a lot of you have heard me talk about before, which tells you about, with that amount of power, how much volume of the speaker you're getting out. And it's so eye-opening to see 1 watt of power there, and you're listening to these speakers and you're like, wow, that's a lot of volume. But you have to be careful, because all of a sudden, some of the music, when we talk about music being dynamic, all of a sudden the meters just go wham, and then they come back to 1. So for that split second, we needed 200 watts or 600 watts for just that split second. And those are the instances that Ken is talking about, where an amplifier can just, raise the white flag and say, I can't do that. Clipping happens and distortion happens. So when you have an amplifier that can produce a lot of power, it's great to have, because it can make your speakers sound much more stress-free and relaxed, but at lower volumes, and can also be really, really dynamic if you so choose to. So it's really
it's because of nature. We want to be able to hear very quiet sounds, yet we don't want to blow our ears out and be damaged by loud sounds. So I'll get myself in trouble, but evolution or God or whoever took care of all these things made our ears hear on a logarithmic scale. So that means that we can take in a very loud volume without ear damage, and yet we can hear a very soft volume. But it does make us buy bigger amplifiers, because every time you want to play twice as loud, you need 10 times the power. I remember people used to, years ago, they buy a little Kenwood receiver from us in the store, and it had 30 watts a channel, and then take it home, and maybe it's not loud enough for them because they like their music loud, and they'd say, maybe I should get a 60 watt unit. Well, no, a 60 watt unit's only 3 decibels louder. That's 1 click of a volume controller. That's 3 martinis would be 12 clicks of a volume controller. 1 martini alone is clicks. So doubling the power almost never makes any difference. 10 times the power is what's needed to play twice as loud. So 1 watt is surprisingly loud, and 100 watts is only somewhat louder, and 1,000 is only a little louder than 100 watts. And that's why people buy these big amplifiers.
That's it.
Now, the meters on the Mac amp, I want to mention just for a moment. They're really accurate. There was one manufacturer years ago who put meters on the front of their amp, because we had them and they decided to put them on theirs. And they said in the manual that the meters can be off by a factor of 300 to 1. So it was a 350 watt amp that They really told you nothing
Yeah.
because the meters weren't fast enough. The whole meter circuit was a diode and a resistor.
Okay.
So you've got Macintosh, the meters are very interesting. They're driven by a circuit that knows that the meter pointer has a certain mass and it compensates for that. So Macintosh meters will go up with 90% accuracy to a burst of music that's 1,000th of a second, which is so fast you haven't heard anything, but the meters will show it. So Macintosh has always put tremendous amount of energy into making the meters actually useful. And yes, most people want them just because they're pretty, but they're pretty and useful.
They are useful. They certainly are. Question from Tim here. He says, how would one get a tour of the McIntosh Labs in Binghamton? He lives in the Finger Lakes.
Ah, okay. So you call Macintosh at 607-723-3512, and you say you want a tour of the company, and this will have to be in maybe 6 months, because right now they're just getting used to all the partitions all over the place because of the virus. And then they do it either Wednesdays or Thursdays. They make appointments in advance, and they'll give you a tour. Chuck will take you all around. And it's amazing because when you visit most companies, even most very high-end companies, they have boards, boxes of circuit boards, and boxes of faceplates, and boxes of chassis, and box wiring harnesses, and then they put the stuff together. Macintosh isn't like that at all. They don't buy faceplates. They buy sheets of glass, and they cut it with a water jet. And then they put the lettering on the back using a printing machine. And they stuff their own circuit boards, and they buy sheet metal and make their own chassis. So literally, it's raw materials to a finished amplifier. People expect it to be a 20-minute tour, and it takes like an hour.
Oh, yeah.
And you won't see it all. You'll be there forever. There's so much. And Macintosh is just this last couple of years invested in an SMD machine, which is the coolest one. That's where instead of buying parts with wires coming out of them, it's just the little part that a robot solders to the top of the circuit board. A human being would have trouble doing it, but the robot has no trouble. I mean, that machine was something crazy like $500,000, but it's going to keep the company efficient, which is important. And just to see this machine, it's like a train. It's so big.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember seeing it. It's a great place to go and see how this is made. You have definitely a better appreciation for what it is once you see it being made, start to finish like that.
And we're going to have videos of that on YouTube soon.
Oh, good.
A very extensive tour of the factory. We're going to have a zillion new videos coming out for everyone to see about products and technologies. And I've already finished 13 videos or something like that, and they're doing one of the factory.
Oh,
so that'll be
really cool. So we have some other questions here I'd like to get to. So this guy says, besides loudness, are there other benefits to speak to regarding high gain versus low gain?
Okay. Well, I'm going to kind of assume that you mean high power versus low power. Gain is what we call the amount of amplification in a preamp, and in an amplifier, we just call it power, even though there is gain in an amplifier. Okay,
sure.
So having extra power is good for two things. Overall loudness, if you want, sure. If you're like me, the first music that I heard on a great system was Doobie Brothers on a full Mac stack, and that's what I always like to play, and I like my music loud. I'm also 62, so maybe I'm losing my hearing a little bit.
To be loud.
Yeah, exactly. So I like my music loud. The other reason to have a lot of power is for the dynamics of music. So I also like percussion. And for years, I had my store in San Francisco, and there's a very large Chinatown in San Francisco. And every other year, I would go to the Chinese New Year celebration where they would have a marching band. And when it goes past you, and that huge drum goes past you, you reconfirm, and I have to do this every other year just because my brain forgets, that no home system can reproduce a live drum.
No.
You need 40,000 watts to do it.
You really do.
Now, you can get 90% of the way there if you have a couple of thousand watts, but you'll never get the last 10%. Now, there's another fellow who works for Macintosh, Ron Cornelius, and when there's hi-fi shows, Ron and I will typically go, and the amount of power you need also depends on your personality. Ron likes to Macintosh makes this little speaker that sounds unbelievable, the XR50. It's just spectacular. But the thing is a pig. It needs tons of power.
It does.
And that was done intentionally. To make it that good and that small, it has to be insensitive. And who cares? Macintosh makes gigantic amps, so you buy a 300-watt amp. I mean, it's like, who cares to a Macintosh customer? And Ron always plays the little XR50 speakers on our 75-watt tube amp. And I would say, Ron, you can't do this. It just won't play loud enough. And he says, I've been playing this for 50 people and they all love it. And I go, well, let me get my Chinese drum album. And he'll say, well, of course it's going to distort on that. Nothing can play that. Who listens to the Chinese drum album? And I go, I listen to the Chinese drum album. That's how I evaluate systems. So, for certain types of music, you want the extra power, not just for volume, but to get that punch for percussion.
Yeah. Classical is a big offender of needing a lot of power.
Absolutely. So the two reasons to have a lot of power is volume and dynamics. Now, there is a downside to buying high power, and that is to get high power, you need a lot of tubes or a lot of transistors. So if you open up the Macintosh 600-watt amp, there isn't a gigantic 600-watt transistor in there. There's a whole lot of smaller transistors, and every transistor adds noise. So the higher the power of your amplifier, the higher the noise floor is. And the difference between, it's funny doing this because my hands are backwards on the screen.
Yeah.
Right thing. So if you have a low power, it does stay loud.
Oh.
And then you have a medium,
Hang on.
but it has more. And you can buy a high, but it has even noise. So, yep.
Wait. You're cutting out pretty bad there for a second.
Okay. Am I okay now?
I think so. Yep. Okay.
Okay, we'll try it again. So, high power is great for volume capability and dynamics. The downside is you have a higher noise floor. So if you have really sensitive speakers, let's say you sold someone a pair of those clip speakers the store sells.
Yep.
Those efficient horns. They special ordered a pair of clip horns.
Yep.
And they've got a phase linear amp from the 1970s with 300 watts. And they're like, oh, this is going to be fantastic. They'll hook it up and they'll say, oh my God, it must be pouring. No. That's the amplifier noise they're hearing because the speaker's too sensitive.
Yeah.
So a really good amp tries to reduce that noise somewhat, and you can only reduce it so much. Macintosh has a cure for that, but we can get to that later. That's a patented thing that they finally developed after 70 years.
Oh, it only took them 70 years, huh?
Well, 50 years, I should say. 50 years, because you can't make an amp much quieter than a certain amount. Transistors just have some noise, and the only way to get rid of that noise is to get rid of resistance, which is electrical friction, which requires you supercool your listening room, which gets really uncomfortable. You have to run to the bathroom like every 2 minutes.
Speaking of, so you're, the Class A and how hot it gets. Here we're going to go. There's a question that just came in about the opposite end of the spectrum, I'll say. I think, where's Macintosh's position on Class D amplification? Now, I know, was it a year or two ago, they came out with the like multi-channel amplifiers that we can use that are indeed Class D.
Yep.
So
yeah. I better explain what a Class D amplifier is. So if you have a light and you don't want it on full brightness, you buy a light dimmer. And what a light dimmer does is it takes the power going into the light bulb and it kind of chops it up into little pieces. And it says, okay, well, your eye can't tell if the light's going on and off very rapidly. So what we're going to do is we're going to start eliminating some of the slices of power going to the light. And that dims the light, and you don't see any flashing if everything works well. If it's a good Lutron dimmer, say. Well, a Class D amplifier says, remember we had that 80 volts attached to the transistor.
Yep.
Well, we don't need that full 80 volts most of the time. We only need it when the music is loud. So what a Class D amp is, we don't apply 80 volts to the transistor. We apply a lower voltage to the transistor for little pulses. And then as the music gets louder and softer, it reads that and sends longer pulses to the transistors to get voltage circuit up. So it's power on demand, and that means it wastes less power. So it is more green. Anyone who drives a Prius would love the idea of Class D amplification. Class D means the amp can be smaller, it produces less waste heat, it pulls more electricity from the wall. And the negative is Class D amplifiers produce noise, just like light dimmers produce noise, because you've got the power turning on and off and on and off and on and off very rapidly. And that noise has to be either reduced or filtered, one of the two. So some people, I have to say, when CD players came out, I was working at the store in Boston, and the first, I won't mention the brand even though they're at, well, I can mention it, they're out of business. Kyocera. They had the first CD player that we had, of a brand we sold. And the first one came in, and I took it home. I was so excited. And I ran to Tower Records. See, everyone I'm talking about is out of business, right? And I ran to Tower Records and I said, I need a CD. And they had one that night. And it was like Toto or something, I think it was. And I went home and I hooked it up to my system and I hit play and I hit eject and I wrapped up the CD player and I brought it back to the store the next day. And I said, this is the most god-awful thing I've ever heard in my life. And CDs really got a lot better.
For sure.
But yes, first CD players playing the first CDs sounded bad. Well, the first Class D amps didn't really sound very good.
No.
But now what we're doing is we're switching the transistors in new Class D amps so rapidly at such a high frequency that they produce almost no noise, and the noise they do produce is so high in frequency that the filter has almost nothing to do. So we're now getting to the point where we can get great sound out of a Class D amp. I'm not sure it's 100% as good as a regular amp, but a really good Class D amp is definitely better than a not so great regular amp.
Sure.
And Macintosh has embraced Class D. The world isn't quite ready for our best amps to be Class D, and we're not quite, Class D isn't quite there, but we're producing 8-channel amps and the 4-channel amp, because that's for Atmos, because if you're putting in-the-wall speakers in, and they're not $3,000 in-the-wall speakers, they can be excellent. They can't be state-of-the-art. No one's ever come into the store and said, I want the best speaker there is, and you say, here's a pair of $800 in the walls. It's not going to happen.
No.
For powering even good in the wall speakers, there's no excuse why you'd have to stay away from a Class D amp. And for Atmos speakers that are in the ceiling, planes going overhead, birds chirping, it's perfect. And then as Class D gets better and better, it'll probably trickle down to more 2-channel amplifiers in everyone's line. I mean, it's the inevitable future. It's probably largely Class D, and it will be mandated by Congress at some point. You can't buy a 100-watt light bulb anymore. All light bulbs eventually may say all amps have to be Class D.
They may.
We'll see what happens. But they're getting better and better and better every year, and we now like them.
So in the interest here, so we talked about a lot of different technology. We talked about solid state a little bit. We talked about tube technology. And then we just brought up Class D. And there was a question, not a question about it earlier, but just a comment about it earlier. I think you guys have finally done something that I don't think anybody else has ever tried. I mean, certainly they've tried to do it externally, but never on a single chassis. So I do want to bring up here. Let me show something to everybody that is. We're very excited about. You know where I'm going, I think.
Oh yeah, this is the amp of everyone's dream.
This beauty right here. This is the MC901, everybody, and we have this at our Montgomeryville showroom. It is hooked up, and we are open for appointment only. So give us a call if you want to come in and to audition these. But this is finally, it's the amplifier everybody's been waiting for. Let me see if I can zoom in right here to get a little bit better picture of just that amp right there. There we go.
Right.
Let me move it down. Okay. So yeah,
good.
You have 2 meters up front right here, and this is a 300-watt tube amplifier. Okay, with a 600-watt monoblock solid state amplifier on the back end, and we have this hooked up to our Focal Utopia Maestros. So we are bi-amping those speakers, and those tube amplifiers are powering the mid-range and tweeter section of the speaker, and the 600-watt monoblock is taking care of the woofers on that speaker. And what a sweet sound. I mean, this is the best that this system has ever sounded. So I urge any of you who happen to be, within maybe even a couple-hour drive, come and hear this setup. It's worth your time. It's really, really nice. I know a question we get a lot about, the bigger tubes right here. Okay, Ken, obviously but these are what are called KT88, and these are the power tubes. This is really where all the power is being generated from the amplifier. How long do they last? That's always a question I get. People are worried about changing tubes out on amplifiers.
Sure. Okay, well, 2 things can happen to a tube. You can wear it out. So the filament in the tube starts out at a given size, and there's little wires in the tube, and they're constantly, as the tube is being used, giving off electrons, and eventually they get thinner and thinner and thinner. So you can wear out a tube. You depending on how much you use your amplifier and how loud you play it, you'll get at least a few years off the tubes, and you might get 20 years off the tubes. It's not out of the question.
Okay.
Now, what tends to happen on a tube amplifier, though, is one of the filaments isn't made as perfectly as all the others, and it gets very thin, and then it falls off the little clips that hold it, and it falls down in the tube and shorts out the tube. And that tends to be what happens. That's when you see a big flash of light in a tube, and all of a sudden everything distorts. And sometimes that happens first. Now, if a tube ever shorts, this amp will alert you that you've got such a problem, and you can replace it, because this amp is 175 pounds. You don't want to try putting it under your arm and marching into the store with it. But you do have to be prepared on a tube power amp to maintain it. No one should buy one of these and, take their last few dollars and finance it, because if a tube goes, you've got to put some money into it. What the big problem with, but replacing tubes a consumer can do. I mean, they just plug in.
Yeah.
The challenges are financially buying matched tube sets. But Macintosh doesn't require that. We're probably the only company in the world that's going to tell you when you go to buy tubes, the tubes are not that expensive. And then most companies will offer at a really high price matched tubes. And matched tubes is totally legitimate, but it's useless on a Macintosh amp. We have a patented circuit where tube matching is absolutely unimportant. So don't ever buy the matched tubes because you think they're better.
Right. It's not needed on Macs.
Yeah. The other thing is biasing the amplifier. And you always read about when you replace the tubes, you have to reset the bias and you have to have a voltmeter and put the probe in and be sure the amp is warmed up, but the music isn't going through it. And it sounds a little technical, but Mac owners have never dealt with that either. Our amps don't need rebiasing.
Right.
So it's pretty easy to live with. It's like driving a Mercedes and having to replace the tires. And how often do you have to replace the tires? It also depends on a tire can wear out. If you like to burn rubber, you're going to need tires more often. If you drive like me, I drive like a grandpa. I never replace my tires, but you could always get a blowout. And it's really, that analogy works. It's just like tires.
Yeah.
But this is the amp of everyone's dreams. It's totally logical to have tubes for the highs and solid state for the lows, because solid state amps do bass the best. That's why you'll never see a subwoofer with a tube amp in it. And the problem is that no one else could do it because of all the factors and the crossover and all. And we solved all the problems. I mean, I tell people when dealers call me and say, I'm going to install my first 901s, how long will it take? And I'll go, about the same time as any other amp. There's one plug on the input and two speaker wires, and you have to turn one knob.
Once it's unboxed.
But unboxing is easy because you don't have to unscrew it from the box. This one has got the foam rings.
There is, so we were waiting to do a review on them, but there is I did a video of unboxing one of these guys. So if you guys head to our Worldwide Stereo YouTube page, there is an MC901 unboxing video, and I did it myself. So to speak to that, yes, it can be done, but it is I'm forgetting now. Is it 200 pounds? 200
in the box, 200. A mere 175 out of the box.
Yeah.
The good news is no one's ever going to steal them because they're too heavy.
No. And I did once I got it out of there. I put it on carpet sliders to help me move it over to where I needed to have them. So invest in carpet sliders if you're going to get one of these amps.
Very smart idea. But so, this amp is it's the best amp Macintosh has ever made.
I would agree. It's amazing. It's amazing. So we're starting to get where we got about maybe a little more than 10 minutes left here. So I do want to get to, so we talked about that amplifier, and this kind of speaks to that you mentioned about the solid state is just the best, kind of amplifier for the, the woofers in the speaker. And, to use your drum analogy, that's woofers typically are hitting those kinds of tones. And if somebody, smacks a drum head, that's the speaker that wants the power, and that's the speaker that's going to do it. And, there can be clipping involved and all these kinds of things, but there are some, and this is the part of the show, folks, where I want you to understand, you make a big investment on an amplifier, and I don't ever do it. But if you were to buy anybody else's very, very high powered amplifier, and you have your speaker leads connected to the speaker or to the terminals in the back of the amp, and then you take the speaker wires that are supposed to go on the speakers and you touch them together, I bet a lot of you are saying a lot of bad things would happen to that amplifier almost instantaneously. But I do this demonstration at the showroom with a Mac solid state amplifier because of what, Ken? And tell them about that technology.
Sentry monitor. So Macintosh Macintosh has patents on solving virtually all amplifier problems. Sentry monitor senses that there's a short in the speaker wire, which could happen because Adam's demonstrating it by intentionally doing. More typically in a home, it's because speaker connector fell out and touched the other one because someone was moving the speaker to vacuum or whatever, it senses that there's a short circuit and instantaneously turns down the current on that channel so the amp won't be damaged. Every Mac amp, when it reaches the end of the assembly line, they bring it up to full power and then they short circuit the output. And Sentry Monitor protects it without fuses, because fuses are a real pain in the butt. I mean, we used to send people to Radio Shack and we can't even do that anymore. So when people blow fuses, it's just a real problem. So Mac amps don't have protection fuses.
Got it.
There's one master fuse required by law, but Sentry Monitor helps that. Should I go on with the other list of features?
Yes. So there's a lot of other cool things that they do here, and so please talk about those. Yeah.
So Macintosh also has a circuit called PowerGuard, and I think, well, I'll take two extra minutes to tell you the story. The Grateful Dead and Woodstock used Big Mac amps. And Big Mac amps tend not to clip because they're so powerful.
Right.
But if you do clip a big amp, you can really hurt your speaker. So Macintosh years ago said, we're going to come up with something that will make our amps turn their volume down by themselves so that if the music is too loud, you won't clip the amp. And the first engineer came up with this circuit board that was about this big with 150 parts on it, trying to predict when the amp was going to clip. And then it would turn the volume down. And Gordon Gow, who was president of Mac at the time, he told me, this is his version of the story, which means, of course, it's exaggerated a little bit because he loved to make stories really interesting. But in his words, he said to the engineer, that's too complicated. And the engineer said, it's the only way to do it. And he said, it's the only way to do it. And the engineer said, it's the only way to do it. I've worked on this for 2 years. And he said, okay, thank you. It's the only way to do it. You're fired. That was Gordon. And he hired a new engineer who actually came up with a circuit that could tell when an amplifier is clipping. And it consists of only 5 parts, and it costs about $6 to put in the amp. And they ran to the patent office because it's so simple. Because what comes out of an amplifier should be exactly the same as what came into the amplifier, just louder. And what Ron Evans said was, we can take the output of the amp, which is louder, and drop it down to the level of the input and flip it upside down and add the two together, and they should cancel. The output flipped upside down should cancel the input. If it doesn't, what's coming out is distortion. The amp must be clipping. And we're going to have that light up a light bulb, but he thought of using an LED, which is really fast.
Yeah.
And a photo optic volume control. So literally at the speed of light, Mac amps turn their volume down if you try to make them clip. So that's called PowerGuard.
Mm-hmm.
Mac amps with PowerGuard can't clip. You can overdrive them 14 decibels before they'll clip. And if you overdrive a Mac amp 14 decibels, you're probably deaf. And if you're deaf, who cares if your tweeters are blown out anyway? So Mac solved that problem. And then the other thing they came up with more recently is quad balancing. And I want to talk about that for a moment because the 901 has quad balancing in both the transistor section and the tube section. And that is to get rid of noise. And you can't reduce noise, like I said, more than a certain amount. What you can do is cancel noise. Notice this word cancel comes in a lot. Macintosh loves this. It's called balanced circuits. So that amp that you showed, the 901, the tube section absolutely produces some noise. Tubes have noise. But there's 4 tubes on one side producing music, And then there's 4 tubes on the other side that are producing upside down music. Then they flip the upside down, wrong hand. They flip the upside down music upside down again, and they add it together, and it cancels all its noise. So there's a specification signal to noise ratio, and that's the noise of an amp. And a tube amp is usually about 90 decibels. And that's pretty good. But if you have really sensitive speakers, you might hear that. On a high power amp, it tends to creep up to about 85 decibels, which is worse because it's how many dB below the music it is.
Yeah.
We're on that amp. I think on the new tube amp, it's 114 decibels, worst case on the tube side, which means there's nothing. It's like polio. We can stop worrying about it. When I was growing up, my mom said anything I did, I was going to get polio because I knew people who had polio. Stop! Don't play in the mud. You'll get polio. Wash your hands. You'll get polio. We stopped worrying about that. Macintosh has stopped worrying about noise. Quad balanced amps cancel all their noise. There's nothing. We never have to discuss it again. And only we have that. And that's a really cool thing. So we no longer have this trade-off of high power is good for loud, but less good for low volumes.
Yeah, and I noticed when we put those amplifiers in, and it was specifically in the lower range, that the system was just kind of playing, maybe a little bit above conversation volume, and I had to stop and turn, and I was like, this sounds a lot better.
Oh, yeah.
Even at that lower volume, so I certainly noticed that.
Detail of music. Yeah. If someone said to me, what's detail of music? It's tiny somethings on a background of nothingness. And unless there's absolute nothingness, it's going to mask the music. It's kind of like, when you stay at a hotel and it's got one of those noisy air conditioners and you're trying to fall asleep and all of a sudden the air conditioner goes clunk and it shuts off, and now you hear the people in the next room.
Well, that's why they have the noisy air conditioners.
Exactly. Or maybe the water dripping in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear that before because the air conditioner noise covered it up. When you take the noise floor of an amp, which you never noticed that there was noise there, and all of a sudden it goes away completely, it just reveals more detail to the music. And that's what the 901 is all about.
For sure.
It's an incredible amp. And we're selling so many of those, but we can only build them so fast. There's 2 ladies at the factory who build that amp start to finish. It's not done on an assembly line. It's done in a separate room, and they do it and they handcraft it. And when it's done, the big machine picks it up with a suction cup and brings it over for testing, and it's just the bomb.
That's a powerful suction cup.
It is.
This question came up here, and there's a couple of responses around it. They would like to hear you talk about this. They said, what would you recommend, a monotube or a dual tube?
Okay. So I believe that Bruce is saying, would I buy a tube monoblock amp or a stereo tube amp?
That's what I was thinking.
Okay, I'm sure that's what it is. Okay, well, mono amps have the advantage that the left and right channels are in completely separate amplifiers and they can't interfere with each other. And that will always be an advantage, but it's not that important the way Mac does it. Macintosh keeps the separation between channels at least 90 decibels. So it's really not too important in that respect. I like buying stereo tube amps. I know that's going to sound unusual. And I've had people say to me, Ken, which would you rather buy? An MC275. So that's Macintosh's classic stereo 75 watt per channel tube amp. Or they also manufacture periodically the same amp in a monoblock form. It's a 75 watt mono amp. I'd rather have the 275 because if you run out of power, you can always turn this amp into a 150-watt monoblock and buy a second one. Where when you buy a monoblock to begin with, you've reached the end of the line. You have to trade up if you want more power. There is an exception. We make a 300-watt tube monoblock, which is enough power for virtually anyone in the world. So if you buy the 300-watt monoblock, do it. But other than that, I like stereo amps. You can bridge them into mono. That 901 already has the 300 watts of tube power for your tweeters, so you'll never run out of power. So that was my long-winded answer. Did that seem, was that clear, Adam?
Yeah, I believe so. The other one that came up here that I want to get to before we go here is Charles asked, would you please talk about the MC2252? Please. He said the magic word. I had to help him out.
Yep. So that is our ultra modern 150 watt per channel stereo amp, which is plenty of power for most people. Great amplifier, built only for Macintosh's anniversary. So on that amp, we took the basic circuit of a Mac 275, the MC 275, and updated it. We had a computer lay out the circuit board. We didn't care how big it became, and it's deep. The amp is very deep. But we didn't care how big it was. We wanted to build a spectacular sounding amplifier for our anniversary. And it's been rave reviews. The experts just love it. It sounds great. We're probably not going to manufacture it for too much longer. It was the 70th anniversary product. It has on the bottom there, that's carbon fiber bottom, and it's got extruded aluminum transformer cases. And the logo is laser etched into the face. It's just a really killer amp. If you love it, don't wait too long to buy it. It doesn't sound as good as the 901, that solid state tube hybrid, but it doesn't cost the same amount either. No. So this is a really nice amp. If you've always wanted the 275 classic amp, but you want to take it one step further, that's it.
So I was just making sure. I thought that's what he meant when he said that. He said, the 2252, and I wasn't sure that was the right model number. So I'm pretty sure he meant 2152, unless I'm missing something.
I think so.
Okay, that's what I thought. Just
It's never been a 2252, so I'm used to just answering the closest number.
I just wanted to be sure. You're the Mac expert. This guy.
I got it.
So I just wanted to make sure. So wow, we really an hour just kind of flew by there talking about amplifiers. That's for sure.
Totally. We're gonna have to do this again.
For sure. And if there's any questions that we didn't get to, folks, I apologize, but we will get back to you. We kind of compiled this list together, and we can answer these questions for you at a later time.
Yeah, so we even talked about autoformers. Didn't have time,
and that's the club, right? That's how we get into the club.
That's
so
right.
You get all the power you paid for. So please follow up with us. We're happy to talk more about Macintosh. We'll certainly have to do this again with Ken. It's always wonderful having you on. So thank you again for taking the time. I know you are a busy man. Just some parting words here, guys. So I want to remind you that for all these amplifiers, we have some of them online as well. And we do have online financing and in-store financing available on these amplifiers. So reach out to us if you have questions about that. I want to thank you all for joining me this week. Next week, we're going to have a special talking about Dolby Atmos, and we'll have some people from Dolby themselves and Klipsch, and it's going to be a really, really good time. So join us next week at 12 o'clock on Wednesday for that. One last thank you, Ken. Again, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been wonderful. You guys have a great Wednesday. All right. We will certainly. Thanks again. This is Adam with Worldwide Stereo, reminding you to listen to music every day. So long.